let's welcome on Kenny Flex Wheeler.
Flex Wheeler, like Flex Wheeler during that time was a human specimen. Like he was the LeBron James of bodybuilding. You looked at his physique and you're like, how does this make any sense?
Look at the split he's doing right now. I mean, I don't think that I've ever seen in the history of bodybuilding anyone be so flexible that he can do this particular pose here.
Believe it or not, few names in bodybuilding have aged like fine wine, quite like Flex Wheeler, and for damn good reasons. The man is a 5-time Ironman Pro champ, a 4-time Arnold Classic winner, and a France Grand Prix champion, just to scratch the surface. What made his success even more mind-blowing is the fact that he had some of the most legendary legs the sport had ever seen. Yet somehow he physically could not do heavy squats, which so happens to be the holy grail of leg day. So how did he exactly do it? How did Flex build tree trunk legs without being able to squat super heavy?
One of the things about training is, you know, a lot of people always make these comments, you know, I don't train hard, or I don't yell or do all this spitting and screaming, but you know, for me it's an inner battle. And I've always believed in a mind-muscle connection. So a lot of the times when I'm training, I'll have my eyes closed because I don't want any obstruction from what I'm looking at outside, and also I'm trying to concentrate on.
To really understand Flex Wheeler's story, we have to take a quick trip back to where it all began. Born Kenneth Flex Wheeler on August 23rd, 1965 in Fresno, California, his childhood was brutal to say the least. He was born into poverty, and growing up dirt poor meant bouncing between homelessness at times and hunger most of the time. There were days when food was scarce, nights when a roof overhead was not guaranteed, and mornings where survival was the only real priority. But as bad as that was, it wasn't even the worst part. Flex's struggles went far beyond financial hardship. He grew up in an environment filled with abuse, crippling self-doubt, and suicidal thoughts that haunted him from a young age. He constantly battled a sense of worthlessness, and if that wasn't enough, he had dyslexia, which turned school into a relentless struggle. No matter how hard he tried, reading and writing was an uphill sprint in quicksand. He kept sinking deeper while everyone else seemed to move forward with ease. But they say every dark cloud has a silver lining, and Flex's story was no exception. Sure, school chewed him up and spat him out, but when it came to athletics, he was a walking cheat code. He wasn't just good, he was exceptional. And while he couldn't change his family's financial struggles or magically erase his dyslexia, he realized that the one thing he could change was his body. And that's exactly what he did. When he was just 7 years old, Wheeler turned to martial arts and threw himself into training with the same intensity life had thrown obstacles at him. And lucky for him, martial arts gave Flex everything he hoped it would. It built his confidence, sharpened his discipline, and fueled his drive to be better. Every punch, kick, and hour spent training transformed him both physically and mentally. As expected, it did not take long for him to stand out, not just for his skill, but for his insane flexibility. The guy could do a full split like it was nothing, which eventually earned him the nickname Flex. But as much as he loved martial arts, there was just one problem. While martial arts relied on speed and skill, strength was just as important. And that's where Flex struggled. He was small, and no matter how fast, agile, or determined he was, there were always bigger, stronger athletes who had the edge. So, searching for a way to build muscle and improve his physique, he turned to weight training. That one decision changed everything. What started as a simple way to get stronger quickly became something much bigger. The weights did not just sculpt his muscles, they gave him something far more valuable: control.
Love martial arts. That's my first love. I've always said that it's nothing better than moving around in there. I mean, that's better than any possible drug you can ever take. Not that I took all the drugs or anything. No, but no, my first love is martial arts. I started that in Fresno when I was 7 years old, and it's still my first love to this day.
For the first time in his life, Flex felt what it meant to be comfortable in his own skin. Training gave him a sense of normality he had never known before. The gym became his escape, a place where nothing else mattered except the work he put in. But even though he had built the foundation of something great, he was still dirt poor, still struggling to find direction. What he did not know was that his life was about to take shape in a way he could have never imagined. With his martial arts background and newly built physique, Flex jumped into the police force right after high school. On paper, it seemed like the logical choice. A stable career, a clear structure, and even a sense of duty. At first, he embraced it. showing up every day with the same discipline that had shaped his body. But the more time he spent in uniform, the more he was just going through the motions. The job provided security, but it did not ignite the same passion that had driven him for years. Something was missing. You see, for Flex, bodybuilding had started as a way to build strength, but at this point in his life, it had become something far greater. The gym was not just a place to work out, it was where he felt the most alive. No matter how much he tried to convince himself that law enforcement was his future, the truth was undeniable. His heart was not in it. The rigid structure of police work could not compete with the fire that bodybuilding had lit inside him. Then there was the money, or more accurately, the lack of it. Flex knew very well that a cop's salary was not pulling him out of poverty. He was so desperate to escape, and his side hustle in bodybuilding competitions was not exactly stacking cash either. At first, he tried juggling both, but it didn't take long to see the writing on the wall. If he wanted to be somebody, to make real money, there was no room for hesitation. He had to go all in. So, after grinding it out as a cop for as long as he could, he finally called it quits. Wheeler first stepped on a competitive bodybuilding stage in 1983, but it wasn't until 1989 that he finally got his hands on a first place trophy at the NPC Mr. California Championships. That win flipped a switch. It was the final push he needed in order to leap to the pros. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. Flex did not exactly become loved overnight. The guy built a reputation fast, but not always for the right reasons. Right out of the gate, he built a reputation for being cocky, arrogant, maybe even insufferable.
Arrives an hour before you do because you're so arrogant. And it goes, when you walk in the room, we can just your arrogance. And I understand that now, because when I watch any of my videos of me talking, I have to turn the volume down. I can't stand it. Just such an arrogant, pompous, you know.
To outsiders, he looked like just another loudmouth with muscles. But in reality, that could not have been farther from the truth. If you've been paying attention, you know Flex was not born into confidence. He fought for it. However, all the self-doubt and the insecurity never really went away. So when he finally found something he was great at, he made damn sure people knew it. The problem was that the chip on his shoulder did not always come across the right way. What he saw as standing his ground, everyone else saw as arrogance. But when you think about it, none of that really mattered. The only thing that did was the fact that his bodybuilding career was taking off. Quitting the police force was the best decision he ever made, because within a few years, his name was echoing through the bodybuilding world. But he was not just another massive dude flexing on stage. Flex Wheeler looked like a sculptor. His legs were perfect, his symmetry flawless, and his physique so balanced it did not even seem real. And by 1993, he was on fire. That year, he stepped onto the biggest stage in bodybuilding, Mr. Olympia. Not only did he make it to the competition, but he placed second in his debut, coming within inches of winning the whole thing. That runner-up finish still came with a cool $50,000 prize, but Mr. Olympia was not the only competition he crushed. That same year, he won the Arnold Classic, the German Grand Prix, the French Grand Prix, and the Ironman Pro, all within a few weeks. Wheeler was finally living his dream.
On the stage now.
That body describes exactly why they call him Flex.
Thus comes the name Flex and his initial championship just a week ago.
How many times do you see a man go into a full split? I've never seen you do that.
No, not in my wildest dreams.
Look at the split he's doing right now. I mean, I don't think that I've ever seen in the history of bodybuilding anyone be so flexible that he can do this particular pose here.
The money was rolling in, the legacy was writing itself, Flex Wheeler was on top of the world. Until he wasn't, because the very next year, tragedy struck. On June 9th, 1994, Wheeler's life was nearly destroyed in a violent car crash that left him broken, bloodied, and hanging by a thread. The impact was brutal. His C5 and C6 vertebrae were crushed, his collarbone snapped like a twig, and the right side of his face was so severely torn that his ear and eye were barely holding on. Every part of his body that had once been a symbol of power and dominance was now shattered. Flex spent months bedridden, his once invincible physique reduced to a fragile, broken shell. The simplest movements became agonizing battles, and the idea of ever stepping on stage again seemed like an impossible dream. But as horrific as the physical damage was, the mental torment that followed was even worse.
3 other occasions where I was really badly injured, and I was still competing. The first one, obviously, was in '93, where I broke C7 and C7 and C6.
The car accident, right?
Broke my collarbone and fractured my skull and all that stuff. And I remember going to the Olympia and watching, and I was just like, I was like, how do I catch back up to these guys? Because here I am standing still, and they're running 100 miles an hour. You know, they're not going to slow down. So how do I make up this time? And I went through such a depression. I just atrophy everywhere because, you know, when you don't train at that same level or not able to eat at that same level, yeah, you're going to lose everything. I mean, it's like traveling at a certain speed. You're traveling 100 miles an hour. Your foot depressed on the pedal at a certain degree. Take your foot off, it's going to start retarding. The body's going to do the same thing. So what I went through during a car accident, just laying in bed and not being able to do anything is, you know, I'm a mental case anyway, as it is. I'm an overthink. I analyze things too much. So imagine that type of mind frame, laying in bed, having to stare at the ceiling with this brace on and all the equipment in my own home, you know, because I went home in my own home and just laying there probably 17 hours a day, being awake because of the drugs I was on didn't allow me to sleep, but just laying there thinking about it.
For a man who had built his entire life on strength and control, waking up powerless and teetering on the edge of paralysis was worse than the crash itself. Wheeler spent what felt like an eternity in a hospital bed, his body a mere shadow of what it once was. The man who had sculpted himself into a near-perfect specimen of muscle and power could not even sit up, let alone walk. Each passing day chipped away at his spirit, and it was not long before old suicidal thoughts crept back in. The physical pain was relentless, but the real agony came from losing the identity he had spent the last few years building. When he finally regained the ability to stand, it should have been a moment of triumph. But instead of relief, Flex felt like he was standing at the bottom of an insurmountable mountain. Returning to bodybuilding felt impossible. Months without training had left his once mighty physique weak and unrecognizable, while his competition had only grown stronger. While he had been confined to a hospital bed, they had been perfecting their bodies, fine-tuning every muscle, and widening the gap between them. For the first time, the comeback he had always believed in, the one thing that had always seemed inevitable, seemed completely out of reach.
So the good thing about when I finally got back in the gym, I started responding really, really fast. So that kind of helped me, but my mental jacked up state is like, yeah, okay, I'm getting back there, but it's not like these guys that stood still and wait for him. Like, come on, man, we'll wait for you, you know, to catch up. They're still blasting. So I'm like, how am I going to catch them? But it was agonizing.
But if there was one thing Flex Wheeler knew how to do, it was fight. This was the same man who had clawed his way out of an abusive childhood and transformed from a lanky, beaten-down kid into a world-class physique that commanded respect. A car accident was not going to take that away from him. The moment he could move again, Flex got right back to training. The road was brutal, his body was not the same, and heavy lifting was no longer an option. So, as much as his mind was ready for war, his body had limits he could not ignore. But Flex adapted. He trained smarter, pushed himself within the boundaries of what was possible, and slowly but surely, he rebuilt the body that had once made him unstoppable. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but against all odds, he found his way back to the bodybuilding stage.
The 1993 Schwarzenegger Classic winner was Flex Wheeler. Last year, he missed the competition after a serious auto accident, but now he's made a great comeback. And here he is on stage, Flex Wheeler, Arnold.
Flex Wheeler weighs 235 pounds, he's only 29 years old, and is 5'9" tall. And I think that using this whole accident I think he's really using it to his advantage, because even had it built into his music where they talk about his accident and how he's coming back and all those things in order to have some influence on the judges. But I don't think that he needs much influence, because he has a perfect body. He came back in great shape. He looks huge. He looks muscular. So he's really the guy to beat, the way I see it right now.
And once Flex Wheeler was back on that stage, he was there to win. In 1995, barely a year after the accident that nearly ended everything, he silenced any doubts by claiming victory at the Arnold Classic, one of bodybuilding's most prestigious titles. As if that were not enough, he also dominated the Ironman Pro Invitational. But Flex was not satisfied with just returning. He wanted to stand among the best. That same year, he pushed himself even further and stepped onto the Mr. Olympia stage, finishing 8th. From there, momentum kept building. Flex returned to the Arnold Classic in 1996 and in 1997, where he won the title again. The following year, he made history by winning the Arnold Classic for the 3rd time and finished 2nd on the Mr. Olympia stage later that year. When he repeated the feat again in 1999, it was crystal clear that nothing could keep Flex Wheeler down. But just when it seemed like he had conquered every obstacle in his path, life threw him another devastating blow. One that even his unbreakable will could not outlift. He was diagnosed with focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, an illness he would later describe as the most aggressive kidney disease known to man. And if you think that sounds terrifying, that's because it is. For the 2nd time in his life, his existence was hanging by a thread. Flex's body was deteriorating rapidly, and if he wanted to survive, he would need a kidney transplant. Now let's break this down without getting too deep into a medical textbook. Focal segmental glomerulosclerosis is a kidney disease that causes scarring in the tiny filters in the kidneys responsible for cleaning the blood. When these filters are damaged, the kidney's ability to function properly takes a major hit. Over time, this condition can lead to severe swelling in the feet, extreme protein loss, and in many cases, complete kidney failure. For Flex, the reality of the disease was brutal. There was absolutely nothing he could do to undo the damage that was already in motion. His body, which had been his greatest weapon, was now turning against him. And the only way forward was a fight for survival unlike any he had faced before. In a nutshell, the disease did not care about his discipline, his resilience, or the fact that he had just fought his way back to the top of bodybuilding. It drained his strength, caused major swellings, and forced his once powerful body into a rapid decline. Training became nearly impossible, not because Flex lacked the willpower, but because his kidneys simply could not keep up. Now, even after announcing his retirement, Wheeler was not ready to let go just yet. Bodybuilding had been his entire life, and stepping away felt like surrender, something he had never been willing to do. So, despite his failing kidneys and the warnings from doctors, he kept pushing forward. And somehow, against all odds, he still delivered. In 2000, his perseverance paid off in spectacular fashion. He won the Arnold Classic for the 4th time, proving once again why he was one of the sport's greatest. That same year, he stepped onto the Mr. Olympia stage and finished 3rd, which was pretty impressive for a man whose body was already fighting against him. But the battle could not last forever. By 2002, the toll was undeniable. The disease was winning, and continuing to compete was no longer an option. This time, there was no coming back, no miracle recovery. Flex Wheeler had to do what once seemed unthinkable: walk away from the stage for good. After retirement, Wheeler decided to go back to his first love, martial arts, with his favorite being Kempo Kwon-do, a variant of Kenpo, Taekwondo, and Aikido. And while it seemed like he was willing to let bodybuilding go, he still tried to make a comeback. In 2003, he received a kidney transplant, and 2 years later, he participated in a demonstration fight at the 2005 Arnold Classic. But at this point, making a real comeback was downright impossible. The odds were not just stacked against him, they were practically laughing in his face. Youth had long since left the chat, his prime was a thing of the past, and no matter how much willpower he had, his body simply was not built for war anymore. Sure, he had a new kidney, but a transplant was not a magic reset button. His body had already been through hell, and there was no undoing the damage. The relentless training, the years of pushing himself to the absolute limit had taken their toll. The muscle was still there, but the endurance, the recovery, the sheer ability to grind through pain was not. Wheeler was not the type to go out quietly, but at some point, even he had to accept reality. The body that once made him a legend could no longer keep up with the demands of the sport that defined his life. And even long after he walked away from bodybuilding, the consequences still lingered for years. In fact, it only got worse because in 2019, the years of wear and tear, combined with his ongoing health battles, finally caught up to him in the worst way possible.
You know, you went through the car accident, and then you went through the thing with your kidneys, and then more recently, I think you had like your leg amputated or something happened with your leg. Excuse me for I don't know the full story on what happened to your leg. What did happen with your leg?
So it's a DVT, deep vein thrombosis. I had been dealing with it for probably about 2 years before I lost my leg.
For a long time, he had been dealing with excruciating pain in his leg, something the doctors kept brushing off as a minor injury. But the reality was far more serious. A massive blood clot had been cutting off circulation for years, slowly destroying his lower leg without anyone realizing it. By the time doctors finally caught it, the damage was irreversible, and as a result, his leg had to be amputated.
This is the most challenging, obviously. I've had probably, I stopped counting at like 60 surgeries. A lot of them I didn't even come out in public and talk about. This is it's interesting. It's hard to put in words, you know, it's nothing that's altered my life greater than this. And I think, even my doctors were trying to be psychiatrists and help me. They were trying to,
Losing his leg was a devastating reality Flex never expected to face. After years of pushing through the pain and setbacks, this felt like the ultimate test. The decision to amputate was not easy, but there was no other choice. The damage was unavoidable. It took everything he had to come to terms with it, but giving up has never been an option. With time, resilience, and sheer determination, he pushed forward. Instead of letting the loss define him, Flex found a new purpose. He stayed deeply involved in the fitness world, mentoring young bodybuilders and sharing his hard-earned wisdom.
Life, it isn't forever, health isn't forever. And I'll leave you with, those pictures and that you guys see of me, and you look at me and think that I'm perfect. I never, and you know this personally because you know me, I never thought I was perfect. I always thought I was imperfect, and I had these issues, and I'd look at my picture and I would tear it apart, every single thing, every video. And it's so odd now that now I look like I'm imperfect. It's the most comfortable I've ever felt in my skin. Wow.
His story became bigger than the trophies and titles. It became about resilience, about adapting when life throws the unthinkable at you. He also became a successful body transformation coach, launched his own line of supplements, and even created his own competition, the Flex Wheeler MGB Mexico Grand Battle Regional, which kicked off in September 2023. And honestly, that's what truly sets a legend apart from the crowd. How they rise when everything falls apart. In this case, Flex Wheeler did not just survive his setbacks, he turned them into fuel.